Yo, hello, welcome to another episode of Sunday School is Cool here, episode 3 of season 3. And yeah, well, today we're going to do a fun one from a certain point of view. Anyway, it's kind of cool. It's a crazy one. This one's the book of Job. Now, if you know anything about the book of Job, and maybe you don't, really, that's fine. Like, I don't hold against it. It's the book of Job. I get it. Like, not necessarily everybody knows what it is or like what it's even about. And some who do, we know the gist, but like it's the book of Job. It's very tedious. It's like 41 chapters, 42 actually. It's crazy. And so like we usually opt to not read much of it. If you're anything like me, I've read it. I've read it through a couple times. It's actually very interesting. It's basically, and they even get into it a bit here in this, like, I'll read the little study Bible intro, see what they have to say, refute a bunch of their talking points along the way, of course. But by and large, it was trying to be fair enough and, guess when it was written and these sorts of things and little clues and, but because nobody really, but no, there are many clues and they even do mention them. You can get a pretty solid guess of where it was written and when and who might the author have been. So so I'll speculate a little bit, but then we're just going to read it. We're going to read the first bit and the last bit. Basically the first 3 chapters and the last 4 or 5 chapters, whatever it is. So, when the whirlwind shows up himself, right, to yell at Job and the others. So anyway, that's going to be the story, and that's what we're going to do. So we might as well just go ahead and start to get into it here a little bit with the background of the book of Job. All right, so here we go. And there are some naysayers because the whole thing is bookended by, like, the very beginning is kind of written in a bit of a poetic style, and then you get into it. And then the very last thing is also kind of goes back to the, like, a little bit of a poetic style. And so some people even say, well, because of that, the style of writing is a little different. When overtly, that's the whole point, is the beginning and the end. And it doesn't mean that the same person couldn't have written it, like it's skillfully written. And it also, like they just try to poke holes with everything, but as you'll see, like it makes, here's probably who wrote it, where they lived ish, and here's the story, and nothing in it, absolutely nothing in it points to anything other than it was written during the Bronze Age. But because they use the word iron, when they knew what iron was, they just couldn't smelt it in the Bronze Age. Like occasionally, like someone could, or they'd find like meteorite type iron and things, and they'd be able to forge it. Like they definitely knew what it was. It was abundant, and like unlike bronze, which you have to smelt copper to get, and like tin and things, or like whatever. I mean, you'd have to look it up. Like it was the Copper Age followed by the Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age. But just because they mention the word iron doesn't mean it was written during the Iron Age. I mean, that doesn't, especially in the context of like how they're describing it. Anyway, I'm gonna get into it. So, okay, we're gonna start here with the intro from the study Bible for the book of Job. Here we go. Maybe I'll put it up on the thing. Who knows? Okay, so the book of Job. At one time or another, almost everyone has felt like Job. While going through trials and times of suffering, we are often overwhelmed by self-pity. We want an explanation for why God allows trials to happen to us. The book of Job records the troubling questions, the terrifying doubts, and the very real anguish of a sufferer. The book of Job can help us in the time when we are surrounded with troubles by giving us a glimpse of God's perspective on our suffering. Because, you'll find out when we read Job. It's also the intro to Satan, first time he's mentioned in the Bible. And the book of Job is the first time where the Bible goes backwards in time. In other words, from the Torah, then you have Joshua and Judges, and it goes all the way up. You've got, Samuel, and then Kings and Chronicles, and all the way up through Ezra and then Esther, which is during the Persian times as well. And then, zoop, all of a sudden you go back, like Job and a couple other books like the Psalms and things were written before that stuff. So Job is the sort of kicks off. They sort of imply it's the earliest one of these books when it goes back in time again. And then after like 5 books, you have the prophet books. And that's sort of how the Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible is arranged. I speak true. You can look it up. All right. So that's the intro of the book of Job, right? The book of Job can help us in the time when we are surrounded with troubles by giving us a glimpse of God's perspective on our suffering. Historical setting. Numerous details in the book of Job indicate a patriarchal setting for its events. Job's wealth is measured in livestock, the same way Abraham and Jacob's wealth is measured. The Sabaeans and Chaldeans are portrayed as nomadic marauders, indicating an early date. The Hebrew word for piece of silver in Job is otherwise found only in conjunction with the patriarch Jacob in Genesis, and then mentioned again in Joshua 24:32. Without a priesthood or a sanctuary, Job offers sacrifice to God in a patriarchal fashion. Patriarchal meaning like in the time of like Abraham and that. Certainly before like Moses gets back from a 40-year trip, and I don't know if he made it quite. He didn't even make it, but others like Joshua did, I suppose. Job's longevity is consistent with the lifespans of the patriarchs. The preference meaning like he lives a long time, but after Moses, like God wasn't going to do that again. The preference in the poetic sections of the book for the divine name Shaddai over the divine name Yahweh may indicate a period before the Exodus. And indeed, I think that's exactly right. Like no one knew his name before, no one knew Yahweh before he said to Moses, tell him Yahweh sent you or whatever. So, and that's a mighty. Many still call him things like Shaddai because they know don't say Yahweh. Don't do it lightly. For whatever reason, some of us have to like honor that name and say, hey, Yah, I'll get you, whatever. But don't do it lightly. Even Jehovah, because it's still Yahweh. I mean, you don't want to do it. It's Yahweh, in Latin. They added an extra. Maybe that'll like keep them from when we mention that name, like going nuts. But it didn't. Anyway. The text indicates that the events of Job occurred in the land of Uz, but the location of Uz is unknown. That Job was the greatest among the people of the East indicates that Job lived east of the Jordan River. Some have concluded that Uz was located in Syria or northwest Mesopotamia. However, most writers think Uz was located near Edom, because many of the proper names in the book of Job occur in the genealogy of Esau, the father of the Edomites. And indeed, that's probably exactly where this story takes place, in Edom. But if they were probably Edomites. Anyway, author and date. There is no consensus about who wrote the book of Job or when it was written. Suggestions for an author include, Elihu is one of the people, Solomon, even Moses, but especially suggestions for the author include Job. He probably wrote it down for whatever reason. And he would know all that stuff better than anyone else. And there's no reason he couldn't have written it down. And if you do any research as to when like writing was developed, that's been around for but Mesopotamia was doing it with cuneiform and like at the dawn of the Bronze Age. But even the alphabet and the Phoenicians and certain, that was like the 1800s through the 1600s BC. So I'm pretty sure Job wrote the book in Edom, where he was from, sometime between 2000 when the time of Abraham and the time of the Exodus. So probably somewhere around 1600 BC is when the events took place, when things were still handled with the patriarchal system. It's what all roads lead to that. If you read the story, it's sort of dated like that. Now they're going to poke holes in it, and then I'm going to refute them. All right. Well, they say, okay, as for the time of the writing, right? Because it's not possible Job could have written it, right? As for the time of the writing, and of course it's possible, that is. As for the time of writing, there is strong literary evidence that the book of Job was compiled and written during the time of Solomon, they suggest. Wait a minute, that's different than Job writing it. When wisdom literature flourished, the mention of iron tools and weapons, and chapter 19, verse 24, chapter 20, verse 24, and chapter 40, verse 18, and even mining, chapter 28, verse 2, implies a date during the Iron Age, parentheses, after 1200 BC. So that's their first attempt to say why Job couldn't have written it. So let's read them real quick and see. Again, they knew what iron was. They just couldn't smelt it. All right, so I have a couple Bibles going here. I have my handy dandy from I saw it at Walmart, this huge print Bible, right? So anyway, let's go to this first one here. 19 verse 24. It says, I'll read 23 to get into it. Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book, that they were engraved on a rock with an iron pen and lead forever. So, I mean, that's about all they could use iron for before they could smelt. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean it couldn't have been. I mean, they knew what iron was even in the Bronze Age, where it was very high tech by the Bronze Age to smelt down and arrive at bronze. I mean, they knew the whole stuff. They just couldn't get things hot enough to melt the iron, typically. So that was the first one they point to. That doesn't mean this wasn't written during the Bronze Age. They knew what iron was. I mean, they can prove it. I mean, they even made stuff with iron during the Bronze Age. Next, 2024. He will flee from the iron weapon. A bronze bow will pierce him through. Okay, so again, this sounds to me like the Bronze Age, right? Because they're saying a bronze bow will pierce him through. Again, an iron weapon could mean they put something iron and fling it, or they used iron for a weapon. They always that's about all you could do is chisel or maybe stab. If you could get a point out of it, you couldn't actually turn it into high tech. The Iron Age, with the advent of they would make steel and all kinds of crazy things, lightweight weapons with iron. They couldn't do that, but this seems like it's the Bronze Age. It says, it specifically mentions a bronze bow will pierce him through, but they claim because it says iron weapon, that must be the Iron Age. But no, I don't, that's not correct either. In my view. And then 40 verse 18. Now 40 verse 18, that seems like that's part of the Yah rant at the end, which we'll be reading. Let's just go to it real quick. All right. 40 verse 18. And I mean, they're really grasping at straws of these three things. And then wait, the next one's even stupider. All right. 40:18. Okay. His bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron. Bars of iron. So, again, this stuff is naturally occurring. Unlike bronze, iron, they knew what it was. That doesn't mean, because it says that, it would have had to have been, all roads lead to, Iron Age. Doubt it. And then they say in even mining in verse 28, verse 2, chapter 28, verse 2. Okay, this one's even sillier. Because they're in the Bronze Age. They know what smelting and iron and mining is. All right, so I'll start with verse 1 for context. Surely there is a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth and copper is smelted from ore. Well, even in the Copper Age, which happens first, they knew that copper is smelted from ore, let alone the Bronze Age. So when they say even mining is mentioned, and gold, obviously, you look at Egypt, I mean, they knew all this stuff. And they knew what iron was. I mean, they did know what it was. It's just they couldn't, do a little research into the irony. Anyway, so none of those things. They say, like, as for the time of writing, there's strong literary evidence that the book of Job was compiled and written during the time of Solomon, when wisdom flourished. The mention of these iron tools and weapons, no, they don't even mention iron tools. They say iron is taken from the earth and copper is smelted from ore. So nope. Then it says, moreover, the description of a horse in a military context may indicate the mounted war horse, which was used at the earliest around the 10th century BC. Factually not true. In fact, I'll provide an image. No, people have known how to ride horses since like 5,500 years ago. They domesticated them 6,000 years ago. And war horses were used not necessarily with chariots and things that you might need iron to like fasten, but definitely they knew what a war horse was, even with like proper, like 2,500 BC. So no, again, that's not true once. That's part of the Yah rant as well, which is, even more, even if they hadn't yet, if God is saying it, it could be for the future, but it wouldn't have been. Job would have understood it. He, war horse, they knew, even then. So at any rate, it was difficult. Not many people, that is even the part of the point of mentioning it, but, at any rate, so that's their only points of to why it couldn't have been written by Job himself, which that's ludicrous. None of those are very good evidence against it, actually. So, moreover, the description of a horse in military context, verse chapter 39, verse 19 through 25, may indicate the mounted war horse, which was used at the earliest. It's just not true. No, it was used way before then. Furthermore, at least two passages in Job may allude to biblical passages from the Solomonic era. Compare 17:18 with Psalm 8:4. Compare 28:28 with Proverbs 3. These various strands of evidence may indicate that Job was written around Solomon's reign. But also, if Job was written first, Solomon could have read Job, right, and included some of that wisdom for his own. It could work the other way. It really depends on which came first, if you really want to go that route. All right, structure. The basic structure of the book of Job consists of a prose framework in the prologue and epilogue, enclosing the poetic body of the book. There are significant differences between the poetic body and the prologue and epilogue. The prologue and epilogue present Job as a patient saint who righteously endured suffering. On the other hand, the poetic body presents Job as despairing of fair treatment by God. According to some critics, these differences indicate that the two sections are separate works by different authors. According to this view, the compiler of Job simply failed to reconcile the two Jobs, in quotes. The apparent contradictions within Job should not be considered an indication of poor editing, but the deliberate work of an accomplished author. The tension between the patient Job and the impatient Job contributes to the overall message of the book. It shows Job as a real person. He was no plaster saint who suffered stoically. Instead, he struggled with his emotions and feelings as we do today. The book of Job teaches that it is not wrong for a person to ask the question why, as Job did repeatedly, see chapter 3, but these questions must not grow into accusations against the sovereign Lord. The whole point is the beginning of it. Doubtful it was two different people did that. Not once. Themes. The book of Job explores all the traditional Middle Eastern explanations of the problem of the righteous sufferer. These include 1. The inherent sinfulness of the human race, 2. The accusation that God is unjust, and 3. The limitations of human understanding. But the main difference between the book of Job and other ancient texts that address this same problem is God's direct intervention in Job's life. He speaks for himself. Thus, the uniqueness of the book of Job is not in its approach to the problem of suffering, but in its revelation of the sovereign God to whom everyone must properly relate. Sufferer and non-sufferer alike must humbly trust in God's sovereign grace. Because Job and his friends were ignorant of Satan's challenge to God, the book of Job contains much bad theology and misapplied truth. It is important to read passages in the book of Job in light of the message and purpose of the entire book. The only proper response to the omnipotent God is submission and faith. In other words, there's a lot of 2 cents from his friends in the peanut gallery, and so there's a lot of things that sound smart written by them when it's their turn to talk, his 3 friends who try to comfort him. But they will get rebuked strongly by God, who doesn't even appreciate them as much as what Job had to say about it, and says so for himself. And they need like supplication, because he won't acknowledge, because they spoke, he was listening to what they said. And then there's a kid, Eli, who does a little better, and God kind of leaves him out of, he says, I'm angry at this guy and your 2 friends there. But even he doesn't, he's the youth and doesn't have it figured quite right. But I mean, I think he does better than the other 3 in trying to speak wisely, and he holds his peace until they're all done speaking. Because 4 people actually show up. It's his 3 friends and this youth. And he was another contender of someone who maybe wrote it, because he was an eyewitness, but I bet it was Job. At any rate, so where were we here? And also, it's funny how certain people, especially certain Jewish people, they're very proud of the prose of in the original Hebrew, there's the poetry of some of the writing style, and they're not wrong about it. It is very talented, but I always wonder, why don't they brag about, what about the Yahweh part? I mean, it's verbatim. That's scary too. I mean, that's kind of cool. I mean, yeah, I know the poetry part, but what about the part with the one God who does all this stuff? I mean, they never when are we all atheists here all of a sudden? I hope not. Right? That'd be silly. That's the mightiest part of it. I mean, certain things are written in a way you see the stuff the story in Hezekiah, the angel of the Lord who kills all the Assyrians, right? I mean, it's just one little bit. It's very humble, and all dead. He died too. But the lead up to that is many chapters, but then just that's it. I mean, stuff like that's pretty mighty too. I know, the poetry part, and yeah, they were skilled writers, but at any rate, even the alphabet stuff was written by the time of Job, you would have been able to just write it. At any rate, and he was clearly a patriarch and a learned individual. God was well pleased with him, which is the whole thing that kicks off this challenge between Satan and God. I bet if you let me do this to him, he won't love you so much. I bet, okay, maybe that, but not this. So anyway, we're about to get into it, but just wanted to say that. Almost done with this lead in here. So where are we here? The only proper response to the omnipotent God is submission and faith. That is so. And it's important to understand some of these passages in the book of Job, it sounds like wisdom, but God doesn't like the wisdom. Even Job's, even he says, I abhor myself, and even he sort of screws up, but not like his friends did. Anyway, the book of Job repeatedly emphasizes the sovereignty and omnipotence of God. For instance, the Hebrew divine name Shaddai, usually translated as Almighty, is employed by all characters in the book. Eliphaz describes the Almighty as controlling the destiny of everyone and as independent of humanity. That's one of his friends. Bildad argues that the Almighty is just and sovereign in his rule over the universe. And finally, Zophar describes the ways of the Almighty as beyond human comprehension. Hence, Job's friends use the name Shaddai to speak of God's transcendence as well as his sovereign power. This emphasis on the sovereignty of God refutes a simplistic understanding of divine retribution, which assumes that there is an automatic connection between one's spirituality and prosperity on earth. Such was the basis of Satan's accusation in the prologue that Job served God only for his own profit. Moreover, it is the basis for Eliphaz and Bildad's advice to Job. Both claim that Job's suffering pointed to a hidden sin in Job's life because God certainly would not punish an upright person. But God's answer to Job refuted this false belief. The Lord declares himself completely sovereign. He's not obligated to bless those who obey him. All his actions are based on his gracious nature and his own free will. In this way, the book of Job is an extended refutation of Satan's challenge that prosperity is connected to people's goodness, and consequently, that people's suffering is connected to their sin. In this way, the book of Job teaches that the Lord is not bound to anyone's preconceived theological system. Elihu's speech on God's greatness and his sovereign majesty over nature serves as a prelude to the climax of the book, the Lord's answer to Job, chapters 38 to 42. In his speech, God lowers himself to Job's level in order to answer Job's question. In the process, he reveals to all people that he is completely free, but also truly good. He is sovereign and he is the sovereign and benevolent creator who continues to determine the course of the universe according to his own hidden plan. Just like Job, we must learn to submit to the Almighty God and accept by faith that he has a good plan for us. Last bit, Christ in the scriptures. Although Jesus is not named in the book of Job, he is the only Redeemer Job could have been referring to when he says, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth." No one else can be called a Redeemer who came to earth as a human being to die for us. No other book in the Bible includes such graphic detail of the problems and questions that believers wrestle with and skeptics ask. In this book are found the wide range of human hurts that Jesus identified with in his earthly life, as well as the ones he emphasizes with as he intercedes for us in heaven. So that is, and then it gets the outline here. I'll provide the pictures while I'm reading it. And that's it. Job was a great man with thousands of animals, including sheep, camels, oxen, and donkeys. The animals and servants were the first things taken from Job. All right, so we're about to get into it. We're going to read the first 3 chapters of Job and then 38 through 42. And I won't say much. I'll just gonna read it. We're gonna do it. All right, so I'll take a quick break. Back in a flash, and we'll read it. Okay? All right. See you in a second. Bye-bye. All righty then. We are back, and we're gonna read the beginning and the end of Job. First part should go pretty quick. The shorter chapters, the Yahweh rant at the end there of God's rant. When he shows up, that part, it's long. There's a whole chapter on Leviathan. Who could say, really? Some kind of sea monster, and they sure were afraid of it. And it was, whatever it is, God, he just, can you do this with Leviathan? I know even in Isaiah, Leviathan, something with demonic stuff and, the Canaanite Baal stuff. But this is clearly some sea monster that, but I'm just going to read it. And no caveats about it. He sets the last thing he says to Job, actually, before for Job coughs up his answer. And he eventually is, we'll find out. But he's probably restored all the things that Father God took from him. But why did he do it? Well, let's just find out. Here it is, the book of Job, the first, I think we'll have our answer in the first 2 chapters, and then we'll read chapter 3, which is the beginning of Job's despair to the three friends who show up, right? And Elihu, the kid, is there too, which we find out later. The youth is probably a teenager. But anyway, here we go. Chapter 1. And yeah, let's just read it. All right. So, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Also, his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. And his sons would go and feast in their houses, each one on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was, when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did regularly. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. So the angels, the hosts came to God, and Satan was among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels, and took them away. Yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped, and he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him, to destroy him without cause. So Satan answered the Lord and said, Skin for skin, yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took for himself a potsherd with which to scrape himself, while he sat in the midst of the ashes. Then his wife said to him, Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? In all this Job did not sin with his lips. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. For they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept. And each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head towards heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job spoke and said, May the day perish on which I was born, and the night in which it was said, A male child is conceived. May that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor the light shine upon it. May darkness and the shadow of death claim it. May a cloud settle on it. May the blackness of the day terrify it. As for the night, may darkness seize it. May it not rejoice among the days of the year. May it not come into the number of the months. Oh, may that night be barren. May no joyful shout come into it. May those curse it who curse the day, those who are ready to arouse Leviathan. May the stars of its morning be dark. May it look for light but have none, and not see the dawning of the day, because it did not shut up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hide sorrow from my eyes. Clearly, Jeremiah had read this before his lament. Why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb? Why did the knees receive me? Or why did the breasts that I should nurse? For now I would have lain still and been quiet. I would have been asleep. Then I would have been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth, who built ruins for themselves, or with princes who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not hidden like a stillborn child, like infants who never saw light? There the wicked would cease from troubling me, and there the weary are at rest. There the prisoners rest together. They do not hear the voice of the oppressor. The small and great are there, and the servant is free from his master. Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter of soul, who long for death, but it does not come, and search for it more than hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly, and are glad when they can find the grave? Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, and whom God has hedged in? For my sighing comes before I eat, and my groanings pour out like water. For the thing I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, for trouble comes. So that's the beginning of Job. And then his friends, then Eliphaz the Temite in chapter 4 answers, and it starts reasonable enough. If one attempts a word with you, will you become weary? But then, unwise counsel is basically given, and Job refutes their points because they keep insisting he must have done something to deserve it, and he didn't. And so, anyway, then Elihu, the youth, sort of rails against all of them. He's sick of hearing about all this stuff. What about what he thinks? And then as he says something, he finishes his thought. And then chapter 38 happens, and this is the end of last 5 chapters of Job. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, and that's all you get. They're going the whole time, and then there's this. Then the Lord answered Job out of apparently a whirlwind shows up. And then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Or who shut in the sea with doors, when it burst forth and issued from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment, and thick darkness its swaddling band? When I fixed my limit for it, and set bars and doors? When I said, this far you may come, but no farther, and here your proud waves must stop? Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place? This is a whirlwind bug. That it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it. It takes on form like clay under a seal, and stands out like a garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and the upraised arm is broken. From the wicked their light is withheld, and the upraised arm is broken. Have you entered the springs of the sea? Or have you walked in search of the depths? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the breadth of the earth? Tell me, if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And darkness, where is its place? That you may take it to its territory, that you may know the paths to its home. Do you know it because you were born then, or because the number of your days is great? Have you entered the treasury of snow, or have you seen the treasury of hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? By what way is light diffused, or the east wind scattered over the earth? Who has divided a channel for the overflowing water, or a path for the thunderbolt, to cause it to rain on a land where there is no one, a wilderness in which there is no man, to satisfy the desolate waste, and cause to spring forth the growth of tender grass? Has the rain a father? Or who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb comes the ice, and the frost of heaven? Who gives it birth? The waters harden like stone, and the surface of the deep is frozen. Can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades, or loose the belt of Orion? Can you bring out Mazzaroth in its season, or can you guide the great bear with its cubs? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you set their dominion over the earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that an abundance of water may cover you? Can you send out lightnings that they may go and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the mind, or who has given understanding to the heart? Who can number the clouds by wisdom, or who can pour out the bottles of heaven when the dust hardens in clumps and the clods cling together? Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens or lurk in their lairs to lie in wait? Who provides food for the raven when its young ones cry to God and wander about for lack of food? Do you know the time when the wild mountain goats bear young? Or can you mark when the deer gives birth? Can you number the months that they fulfill? Or do you know the time when they bear young? They bow down, they bring forth their young, they deliver their offspring, their young ones are healthy, they grow strong with grain, they depart and do not return to them. Who set the wild donkey free? Who loosed the bonds of the onager? Whose home have I made the wilderness, and the barren land his dwelling? He scorns the tumult of the city. He does not heed the shouts of the driver. The range of the mountains is his pasture, and he searches after every green thing. Will the wild ox be willing to serve you? Will he bed by your manger? Can you bind the wild ox in the furrow with ropes, or will he plow the valleys behind you? Will you trust him because his strength is great, or will you leave your labor to him? Will you trust him to bring home your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but are her wings and pinions like the kindly stork's? For she leaves her eggs on the ground and warms them in the dust, and she forgets that a foot may crush them, or that a wild beast may break them. She treats her young harshly, as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without concern, because God deprived her of wisdom and did not endow her with understanding. When she lifts herself on high, she scorns the horse and its rider. Have you given the horse strength? Have you clothed his neck with thunder? Can you frighten him like a locust? His majestic snorting strikes terror. He paws in the valley and rejoices in his strength. He gallops into the clash of arms. He mocks at fear and is not frightened. Nor does he turn back from the sword. The quiver rattles against him, the glittering spear and javelin. He devours the distance with fierceness and rage. Nor does he come to a halt because the trumpet has sounded. At the blast of the trumpet he says, "Aha!" He smells the battle from afar, the thunder of captains and shouting. Does the hawk fly by your wisdom and spread its wings towards the south? Does the eagle mount up at your command and make its nest on high? On the rock it dwells and resides, on the crag of the rock and the stronghold. From there it spies out the prey. Its eyes observe from afar. Its young ones suck up blood, and where the slain are, there it is. Moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, Shall the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? He who rebukes God, let him answer it. This out of a whirlwind. Then Job answered the Lord and said, Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no further. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Would you indeed annul my judgment? Would you condemn me that you may be justified? Have you an arm like God? Or can you thunder with a voice like his? Then adorn yourself with majesty and splendor, and array yourself with glory and beauty. Disperse the rage of your wrath. Look on everyone who is proud, and humble him. Look on everyone who is proud, and bring him low. Tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in their dust together. Bind their faces in hidden darkness. Then I will also confess to you that your own right hand can save you. Look now at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now, his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring him near his sword. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus tree in a covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade. The willows by the brooks surround him. Indeed, the river may rage, yet he is not disturbed. He is confident, though the Jordan gushes into his mouth, though he takes it in his eyes, or one pierces his nose with a snare. Stand by. Sorry. Chapter 41. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook, or snare his tongue with a line which you lower? Can you put a reed through his nose, or pierce his jaws with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? Will he speak softly to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird, or will you leash him for your maidens? Will your companions make a banquet of him? Will they apportion him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him, remember the battle, never do it again. Indeed, any hope of overcoming him is false. Shall one not be overwhelmed at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand against me? Who has preceded me that I should pay him? Everything under heaven is mine. I will not conceal his limbs, his mighty power, or his graceful proportions. Who can remove his outer coat? Who can approach him with a double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face with his terrible teeth all around? His rows of scales are his pride, shut up tightly as with a seal. One is so near another that no air can come between them. They are joined one another, they stick together and cannot be parted. His sneezing flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelid of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights, sparks of fire shoot out, smoke goes out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot, and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. Strength dwells in his neck, and sorrow dances before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together. They are firm on him and cannot be moved. His heart is as hard as stone, even as hard as a lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. Because of his crashings, they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it cannot avail, nor does spear, dart, or javelin. He regards iron as straw and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones become like stubble to him. Darts are regarded as straw. He laughs at the threat of javelins. His undersides are like sharp potsherds. He spreads pointed marks in the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. He leaves a shining wake behind him. One would think the deep had white hair. On earth there is nothing like him, which is made without fear. He beholds every high thing. He is king over all the children of pride. Almost done here, last chapter. Then Job answered the Lord and said, because remember, God's insisting you will answer him. So now he's finished questioning him. Let's see what he says. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You asked, 'Who is this who hides counsel without knowledge?' Therefore, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Listen, please, and let me speak. You said, 'I will question you, and you shall answer me.' I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore, I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes." That's his answer. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear. I heard of God, but now my eye sees you. Therefore, I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. That's, because he says a lot of things in the book of Job along the way. And so it was, after the Lord had spoken these words to Job, that the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temite, "My wrath is aroused against you and your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now therefore, take for yourselves 7 bulls and 7 rams, go to my servant Job, and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering, and my servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept him, lest I deal with you according to your folly, because you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." Basically, they need supplication, and Job's got to do it, because he won't accept it from them. So Eliphaz the Temite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite went and did as the Lord commanded them, for the Lord had accepted Job. And the Lord restored Job's losses when he prayed for his friends. Indeed, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Remember, he was the richest guy in Edom. So yeah, he was already rich, and now he's going to restore to him twice as much, right? So twice as much as he had before. Indeed, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Okay? So then all his brothers, all his sisters, and all those who had been his acquaintances before came to him and ate food with him in his house, and they consoled him and comforted him for all the adversity that the Lord had brought upon him. Each one gave him a piece of silver, and each a ring of gold. Now the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, for he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he called the name of the first Jemima. He called the first Jemima, the name of the second Keziah, and the name of the third Karen Hapuk. In all the land were found no women so beautiful as the daughters of Job, and their father gave them an inheritance among their brothers. After this, Job lived 140 years, and saw his children and grandchildren for 4 generations. So Job died old and full of days. And that's the story of Job. And the whole thing has started because Satan had something to say about, he was already pleased with Job. And it's important to note that the stuff that happens to Job is a very short, 2-month period of his life. Or at least no more than 2 weeks from when the second thing Satan does to, causes some boils and stuff happens, which would have been in short, it basically blitzkrieged him with now your life is just fully cursed, things that couldn't happen unless God caused it. And in a way, he does, he lets Satan do what he wants, and he'll do it as long as he doesn't kill him. And so that's the book of Job. That's the beginning of it and the end of it. But the bulk of it, which starts in chapter 3 and runs to 37, but also would include God's rant, so goes to 42 verse 6 proper. Anyway, that's Job, And yeah. And a piece of game, we don't, that's not worth it. I mean, what does it profit a Reek if they, gain a piece of game but loses all? I mean, that's really, it's probably stupid, all right? I know you like looking at trucks and signs and look, that means we're great. We're in a club. But there's a mightier club. You want Slytherin. You want to be, are you a publican? Do you want to go public with all this crap that they've been doing against our rights here? No? Well, then that's treason, and then, Operation Pop. All right. Anyway, that's an unrelated matter. Just had to get a little shot in there at the end. But that's Job, okay? And obviously it's more of an internal bit. I'm persuaded it happened verbatim. And Job even wrote it down for himself, and it's one of the oldest books in the Bible. And they would have had it. Ezra wouldn't have had to do anything to keep it compiled and bring it back. It's a very old book, and I think it's clear enough that it is during the time of the patriarchy and somewhere in between the time of Abraham and Moses, in the land of Edom, which is modern day Jordan. That's where, to the east of the Jordan River, that's where this would have went down. So, okay, Book of Job, beginning and end. That's your little lesson. Have a good day, everybody. Happy New Year, a few days early. And yeah, God bless. All right.